Yo guys, Visionist Gen here, back with more Marvel Rivals content. Today's video will be around showing you the best tank gameplay for each individual Vanguard in this series, the third episode of the series in my channel, and this episode will be around Thor, the son of Odin, one of my personal favourite characters in all of Marvel, showing you the best gameplay possible that I've obtained throughout the way on getting the Lord Icon. Now, to remind you guys, in case you haven't seen the first two episodes, the catch of this series is that I have to have earned the Lord Icon on each of the heroes to be shown in this series before I can even upload them to the channel. So as you can imagine, this will take some time to complete, but I'm always up for that challenge, and in this video I'll give you my advice on how best to use the hero, the strengths and weaknesses of this character, the do's and the don'ts for my own experiences, as well as any tips I've learned along the way, both the character in general, but also on how best to earn the Lord Icon, as well as the fastest and most efficient way possible. So without further ado, let's get right into things. So I guess first thing first, just as a general overview of the character, to be clear, before I get into this video, this is not a guide of the character's abilities. I've already made a guide separately on the channel, which is linked in the description below for any newer players that want to learn about this character and his abilities, as he of course has had many changes throughout all of Marvel Rivals. Now, as you guys probably know, Thor is a Vanguard in this game with incredible sustain, crazy damage output from both range, using his awakened force as well as close quarters as a hybrid brawling tank who could basically has amazing ability, especially for a tank in itself. Of course, he is slightly slower, but with his Mjolnir attack, he can basically fly around and aggro all sorts of players, whether they're high up in the air as a flyer or down on the enemy backline. Now, the biggest downside I'd say I'd found over the duration of this game of playing Thor is that he doesn't really work in all systems or team comps based on his kit, meta, and just overall there are better tanks in the game, I guess. I got Thor Lord very early in this game. He's always been a personal favorite of mine, and I got him really early, sort of good at him really early on in the game. But since I've got into Lord, I haven't really played him that much, and he's had various different changes, and he's become more of a weaker tank, especially versus other tanks. They're just better options out there, in my opinion. But like I'd say, he's very strong when paired alongside another diving style tank, or duelist that is, as the two of them can basically just compound, aggro, dive, brawl, all of that, and just make the lives of supports on the enemy team just miserable. And that is basically where he's going to be super effective. But of course, you have to then factor in and make sure that your supports have help as well. So maybe if your team has like a Punisher, a Storm, or Winter Soldier, or whatever, someone who's going to be a ranged sort of duelist, versatile, and be able to assist you as you basically dive and brawl other tanks, as well as protect the supports as well. As basically the last thing you want to do is leave your supports vulnerable or alone, and they will massively appreciate if you're peeling back to them and supporting them as well. But I'd also say he's very effective when your team has a two-tank setup generally, like when paired with a damage blocking tank such as maybe Groot, Doctor Strange, Magneto, or even Emma Frost. That way he's able to dive, sort of thrive on based on his kit, and just dive around, being solely responsible for separation, isolation, and staying alive effectively, whilst pretty much just annoying the fuck out of the enemy team supports, and basically just doing the in and out sort of method of just separating enemies using Mjolnir, and then basically using the awakened sort of full force to basically try and use ranged and close quarter damage where possible. Remember, peel back to your supports. As a Thor player, don't just keep going backline and flanking and all this sort of stuff. Make sure you're peeling back to your supports, and you can play frontline. You can be entry at all costs using this character, of course. Do not forget that aspect. It's a really crucial part of Thor's role. I see a lot of players just use him and constantly keep making the same mistakes and leaving your team vulnerable. Don't do it. You're not going to be effective doing that. And being able to dive back and forth, using his mobility to protect your supports, aggro flyers, and dive into the enemy sort of support setups. Of course, be the lead or entry into team fights, as I was saying. His strengths and weaknesses, he is so good at dealing area of effect, controlling situations, and alleviating point pressure on objective game modes. Diving and brawling with other brawling style characters, he's so effective, especially against the likes of Hulk. I always have a fun time playing against like a Hulk, because for the most part they don't really have anything they can do and tend to have to go back to their teammates because he has so much sustain. He's, like I said, using Mjolnir to create paths, dueling with aerial heroes as well, diving in and out sort of risky areas, and being responsible for separating ground heroes from the pack, isolating them, and really prioritizing that opening kill whilst also not getting sort of overzealous or tunnel visioned, as that is really easy to do with this character, making sure that you're aware of your surroundings. And of course, he matches up so well against shielding tanks, in my opinion. With his brawling capabilities, he's able to hit through Stranger's shield or separate Magneto or Groot with ease, and really excel versus low health targets as well, who should be of course your main focus as a Thor player when pushing the enemy team's backline and isolating them to either cut off heals, delay the pace of the team and disrupting the enemy team setup, and then of course back up or sort of retreat back to your team to support them as well and protect your supports. Now, positioning and being aware of your surrounding is very key for Thor. I'd say more so than most characters in the game. You can flank, you can play point break, so the entry hero for your team. You can cut off flyers from being impactful and mitigating their impact, grounding them, and then with the new effect for, of course, from Thor's bubble with the latest sort of updates, which effectively stops flyers from using their evasive abilities temporarily, and this is really crucial. So as you can see, he's very versatile, but the skill is understanding his kit, how to manage it, when to use his abilities, who to target, how to maximize his sustain, making sure that you don't get picked off and leave your team at a disadvantage, because it's really easily done. Using his mobility and his playstyle to find open kills in team fights, and utilizing his incredible AoE, using the lightning, and making sure you're compounding the two main aspects of his role, separating heroes who lack mobility, such as Magneto. All of these sort of things combined together make him really, really effective. You'll also need to understand your team's comp. This is where most sort of players, I'd say, fall down. Basically, if you're in too much of a heavy dive comp, you'll find that your healers will struggle more and hate you for this. Unless, of course, your dive comp is just super effective and suffocates the life out of the enemy team and stops them from being able to do pretty much anything, which, of course, can work out, but it's very reliant on teammates being good, and that is not really a good strategy, first of all, especially if you're a player who plays on your own like myself. And if you go into quick play, of course, you can test this out for yourself. You will find game to game, it's not really a good strategy to go into a heavy team sort of dive comp. If you have ranged heroes on your team or a damage blocking sort of tank, a second tank in your team where you can sort of thrive on doing what Thor does best, then you're going to be more successful. Now, the do's and the don'ts, I guess, I'd say personally, I wouldn't use Thor in a solo tank setup by any means, pretty much in any scenario. He just doesn't thrive in this situation as he literally relies on mobility and brawling to be effective, which often means he needs to be more sort of isolated and play sort of, like I said, flank, create paths for your team, challenge flyers, or even isolate the enemies by separating them from the group, either on the front line or on the back line, and that way you're going to be more effective. And being a solo tank means you can't really be doing this, otherwise you're going to leave the rest of your team without a tank pretty much. Now, learn from his weaknesses. Penny, Namor, Mantis, all of these sort of heroes really slow down his effectiveness as being essentially counter dive heroes, but like the likes of Winter Soldier, Emma, and the Thing as well, they're other notable heroes that I found and recognized along the way as balanced heroes in sort of matchups against Thor, maybe stronger even, but Thor, like I said, bear that in mind because he does have matchups that will basically counter him, as all heroes of course do, and these are the sort of heroes that I've recognized along the way that have been a bit more questionable in terms of 1v1 situations. Now, like I said, this isn't a skill question, it's more of like the kit and how their playstyle affects basically or maximizes your abilities to be able to isolate them. They're just not that easy to isolate, and they don't really allow you to sort of pick off really easily, so just make sure you're aware of all of your counters as playing this character, and I guess that's just generally advice for any hero that you're going to use anyways. You can change up your hero, make sure you're aware of that. Don't just use the same character at all times, because certain maps and modes or team comps will make sure that this character is not effective, especially at the higher levels when characters catch on. Now, often you'll find that Thor's almost like a 1v1 specialist. Like, there's very few heroes who can go toe-to-toe with Thor when played right, and even he can control an entire section of the map when played right. Using his AoE, his lightning, his bubble, his awakened state, his ultimate abilities are all very effective for point pressure on objective game modes and competitive, and controlling a set area. My personal advice, like based on experience and rankings, unfortunately, I will be honest, I'd say that he's one of the worst tanks in the game. It does hurt me to say that, like I said, I'm a big fan of Thor, and I got him to Lord really quickly in the game because I love this character, I love the style of this character, but some say Penny's also worse, but although against dive, I guess so she's incredible, so maybe it's more of a system-dependent thing, but although very versatile, Thor, I'd say, is probably just not as strong as any other tank in the game, still to this point, even with all the changes, but hopefully that will change once again. And I will add that once I get a hero to Lord, I really tend not to play them, as I am grinding Lords on this game, and if I spend any extra time playing a hero that I've already got to Lord, then it means I'm just wasting time effectively, to a sense. Of course, I like playing characters I've completed, I'm really good at, and I just haven't really played Thor all that much since getting into Lord, which is quite a while back now, so I don't actually know how viable he is in today's game. I just never really see him, and I play a lot of Emma and Penny and myself at the comp level in like the high sort of Diamond or Grandmaster is what I'm at the minute, and basically I've sort of not seen him used very often, and I've nearly got them to Lord as well, and he's just never a problem for me to deal with when anytime I'm using those characters or playing against them, so I would just say that. And in my experience, maps where there's more room for like separation, rooms around the map where you can separate your enemies, or tight spaces to channel and focus his lightning and basically into a small group where he's going to be more effective. For me, that's personally how I would like to use him and how I found him most effective. I also really like playing Thor alongside maybe a Groot, basically to utilize the walls as a dividing element to basically separate an enemy, and often found me getting sort of the early entry for kills quite frequently doing this, and basically picking off enemies on the front line or separating them, and then allows your team to swiftly utilize your numbers advantage and gain an advantage with the ultimates, which of course is the very crucial element in this game at the highest level. If you guys are going to win the ultimate team fights, that is basically how you're going to win every single objective game mode, so just bear that in mind. And of course, if you get good at picking off squishies, especially those healers, and being able to regroup back to your team consistently, you'll have a lot more success and fun when playing Thor, and your teammates will thank you for it for being effective by doing this. You'll often find that it's just a lot easier and stress-free if you can dive in backline, get those picks, and then dive away. Of course, make sure you're aware that if teams change up their heroes, they are probably figuring out if you're really having a good time at the start of the game, but you start to notice that you're not being impactful, or you're slowing down, or the enemy team's just adjusted, you might need to change your character, because it's really easy to counter Thor, especially if a team knows what they're doing, so just bear these in mind. Now, as a tip for getting into Lord, as the sort of two main things I'd say, first is to maximize your time using him, and to reach the Lord icon fastest, focus on your hero-specific challenge for Thor, and this is to accumulate Thor Force. Force. To do this, you can basically passively generate over time, or in order to boost the amount you generate by using his abilities, staying aggressive and constantly hitting enemies, you're going to basically generate more Thor Force, and the more hits you deal, the longer you stay alive, the more Thor Force you would generate. So basically incentivizing you to stay aggressive and stay in the aggro and basically hitting enemies as long as possible. That is basically how you're going to farm Lord a lot quicker. And I guess like I would just add on to the back of this as a general tip, which is more generic I guess, which can be applied to all heroes, is to just focus on that bottom objective always. Like have it in the back of your mind when you're playing with each of the heroes. When you're aiming to reach Lord faster, if that's your goal, make sure you're focused on that bottom one, because that's the easiest thing that you can dictate. The rest will come based on the teams you're playing with or against. That would, like, if you're going to take an amount of damage blocked, or if you're going to kill people, like that will come down to a certain skill level, of course, but for the most part, it is sort of map dependent and also who you're playing with and against as well. And then finally, I'd also just say, make sure you're not solely using Thor. Like a lot of players will just use the same hero forever. Like they'll just use the same, if you're grinding Lord, they'll just use the same hero until they get to Lord and then move on. That's, in my opinion, a terrible decision, because some maps, like I've alluded to all along, some team comps, some enemy team comps, whether you're your team or not, you could be a solo tank. You shouldn't play Thor if you're a solo tank. You shouldn't play Thor against certain team comps. Like I said, if they have counter dives, he's going to be less effective. These are the sort of things I would definitely advise against doing. So if you're playing Thor and you're trying to get into Lord, don't just only play Thor. Have a balanced mix. If you're going to have a diving style hero, then have a ranged hero in the background so that you can change it up. Have a counter dive hero, have a dive hero, whatever it may be. Just have multiple heroes on the go. That's my personal advice, and that would be applied to every single hero you're grinding for Lord, if you guys, of course, are like myself and are doing that. So in summary, Thor is arguably the best hybrid hero in the game in my personal opinion, with some of the game's best mobility, combining evasion, flight, and aggression to counter most heroes in 1v1 scenarios. With incredible sustain and brawling capabilities, he's very good at various different ranges, making him really reliable in various different team comps. But honestly, unless you're playing him in isolation and being able to dictate your own game plan, basically playing on your own and hoping that your teammates around you just do what they need to do, i.e. you have a 2-2-2 setup where you have two tanks, therefore you are able to play more sort of independent, then you're going to be sort of finding more success. And of course do, as I've said throughout the video, which often isn't the case at all, and at least at the higher level in ranks and competitive, then unfortunately Thor just isn't the best option of tanks right now. In most scenarios, there's just better tanks in almost every category. Of course, he does pretty much do everything there is, just not necessarily better than any single tank. Like he's really good at diving, but he's not the best diving tank. He's really good at brawling, but he's just not the best brawler, and so on. You get what I'm saying? Even with sustain, maybe he's the best sustain tank, but really it's just not effective playing Thor in most team comps. So unfortunately, I think they will retweak him and get into the right balance eventually. Like he's nearly definitely there, and hopefully by the time this video comes out, maybe there's an update that makes him even better. But for the most part, he's just not quite right there yet at a minute. And hopefully, like I said, he comes back to that level, because right at the start of the game when I was using him, either I was just really good at him or he was just super good at the time. But I just don't see Thor players use anymore, and I can't recall the last time I actually saw a Thor player that came across really have a good impact on the map. So maybe that's just me, or maybe it is Thor in general, but hopefully, like I said, we'll see him come back on top of the mountain once again. But with that said, if you guys have enjoyed the video, as always, don't forget to like and subscribe. It massively helps me out, as I'm a small creator, as you can see on the channel. If you have any comments or thoughts about Thor, or what I've said throughout this video, or any cool clips that maybe you want to share of using Thor, then let me know down below in the comments and I'll get right back to you. I'm VisionSGen. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.